This happened when I was 33 years old. My wife and I had just gone through a messy divorce, and around that same time, my job had been terminated due to work cuts. Our lease was up, and the prospect of becoming homeless was nearing. My now ex-wife moved in with her new boyfriend, and I really had nowhere to go. In desperation, I contacted one of my friends, who was married and had a kid, and I asked if it was okay for me to stay there a little while, just until I got back on my feet. I was surprised when he actually said it would be okay, and the next day he came over and helped me haul my stuff over to his place. He even let me bring my dog. When I got there, he helped me unpack my things. I was shocked to see that he had emptied out one of the guest bedrooms for me so I would have a room for my things. He knew I was an avid online gamer, and he even purchased a high-speed internet connection for me so that I could play games and download music. That afternoon we went to the store and he let me get any kind of food I wanted for the house. He paid for everything. It was great. This all kind of surprised me because I wasn't exactly the best of friends with him. For a long time I used to start arguments with him for no real reason, but he always forgave me. He was always just a really cool guy, always helping people. He even offered to help me find a job. After staying there for a few weeks, things were going pretty well. I had a new job lined up. I didn't really have to spend any money because my friend paid for everything, including the bills, and even my dog was getting along with his kid. His wife was also nice to me, always asking me if I needed anything, making me lunch, taking my dog for a walk. It was like a vacation. I also had zero stress, and I spent most of my days gaming online or watching movies that I had downloaded. But like anyone that spends a lot of time away from work, I really wanted something to do. As luck would have it, my friend was also an avid ghost hunter, kind of like what you see on those TV shows, only better. He was dead serious about it too. He had a huge loadout of gear, kept investigation files, notes, logs, and every piece of audio or video that he captured. I asked to tag along on a few hunts, and he actually let me go. As it turned out, he had a whole network of people he investigated with, and I got to meet a lot of them. It was fun. Not super scary or anything like that, but a lot of fun. One evening, he took me to this abandoned location and we set up a bunch of equipment in the basement area. Cameras, voice recorders, motion alarms, you name it. When it was my turn to try and make contact with whatever might be haunting the place, I asked out loud, "If there is anyone here, can you come toward us?" It was only a few seconds later that we heard the unmistakable sounds of feet shuffling in the room just ahead of us. We could hear bits of stone and rubble being twisted into the concrete floor as the sound of the footsteps got closer. I could feel the hair on my arms standing on end. I felt maybe like asking for something in the dark to come towards us might have been a mistake. I looked over at my friend and he was just very calm, his face faintly illuminated by the LCD screen of the infrared camera he was filming with. And then, just as quickly as they began, the footsteps stopped. We stayed another hour with no further activity. My friend then said, "I think that's enough for one night. Thank you for trying to communicate with us." Why was he being so polite, I wondered. Is that how this is done? Aren't we supposed to provoke them and make them appear, I asked. He said no. That's disrespectful. I kind of thought he sounded childish saying that, and I honestly felt like maybe he was lecturing me. He packed up his gear and took it to the car. As for me, I just stood outside the place and felt a sense of being half mad and half intrigued. I really thought it was foolish to just pack up and go after we came so close to possibly getting a ghost on film. I waited for my friend to start the car so he'd be out of earshot. And then I shouted a few expletives and I said, "We'll be back." I then went back to the car and we drove back home. It was maybe a week or two later, and I had all but forgotten about the incident. My friend hadn't caught anything on the camera he was filming with, and the audio didn't seem to have captured any of the sounds we were hearing. As promised, my friend had got me a job at his place of work, and things were going okay. It was a weekend, and since I was off of work, I got some beer and I invited a few female friends over that I had met online. In hindsight, it was pretty irresponsible of me, not to mention disrespectful. I mean, here I was about to get drunk in my friend's house with two females that I really didn't know, and his wife and kid were there as well. I decided that we should just stay in my room so as not to make them uncomfortable. We just spent the night talking, playing games, drinking cheap beer, and just having a good time. At some point, we all fell asleep. I don't know how long I was out for, but at some point during the night, I felt one of the girls tugging on my arm and begging me to wake up. She said, "There's someone over there." I rubbed my eyes and sat up. "What time is it?" I asked. "What's going on?" She sounded absolutely terrified. She repeated, "There's someone over there." and pointed to the corner of the room by the door. A sense of complete shock and disbelief took over me as I stared into the darkened corner of the room and saw a set of fingers gripping the edge of the wall near the door. She started to hyperventilate, and I felt her nails digging into my arm as the fingers on the wall began to move and make a scraping noise as they slid back out of view. I knew that I couldn't be seeing things, and it certainly wasn't the alcohol because we were both seeing it. I felt like I needed to vomit, and my whole body began to feel hot and tingly. She shoved her face into my chest and began crying, just as a deformed, rust-colored face and bald head peered from around the corner. It then gave me the most sinister smile I have ever seen in my life. I grabbed one of my friend's small cameras from the end table and I snapped photo after photo. It was around this time that the other girl woke up, and this was followed by a loud crashing sound from where the figure was standing. I turned on the lights, and there was nothing there. The next day the girls left, and I handed my friend the camera and I told him to check the photos. He loaded them up onto his computer and asked what exactly was going on. I told him what had happened, and he seemed really angry with me. He asked me, "What did you do?" I didn't know what to tell him. I didn't want to mention what had happened at the investigation that night, so I just begged him to look at the photos. I thought for certain that the camera would have at least one photo of this thing, but that wasn't the case. Every photo I had snapped was just a distorted mess of odd colors, blurry lines, and strange light reflections. Even things in the photo, like the painting he had on the wall, just looked distorted and misshapen. I was starting to connect the dots. I had disrespected whatever was haunting that place, and it had followed me back to my friend's house. It wanted to get back at me for what I had said. It wanted to scare me. And it worked. This was 9 years ago. I'm a huge music fan, and when one of the local music stores was closing down, I decided to take the risk and buy the store, as well as their entire inventory. In the digital download music age, this probably wasn't a wise investment, but I did get the store and the huge selection of CDs and vinyl records they had for an extremely reasonable price. I hired some friends to help me run the store, and from time to time, my older brother would work the register. By the time we had opened, we had renamed the store, repainted everything, and set up a photo studio inside the store, another passion of mine. The first few weeks, business wasn't at all that spectacular. I think maybe there was some loyalty to the previous store owner from the locals, and they refused to shop there. I never once had anyone come in the shop that ever mentioned having been there previously. I didn't let that get to me, and I saw it as an opportunity to get some new customers in and target different demographics. One morning, I received a phone call at the store. We had kept the old store telephone number. When I answered and said the name of the store, I was met with a really long silence. I was just about to hang up when the caller asked when the store had changed names. I told him that it had been a couple of months by that point and asked if there was anything he needed or if he wanted to stop down and see the changes to the store. He then asked me something really weird. He asked if I ever spent any time in the basement since owning the store. I said no, not really. I wasn't sure what this guy was going on about. We seldom ever went into the basement. It was large and full of junk. The upstairs of the store are efficiency apartments, and the tenants had stored a bunch of their stuff in the basement before we bought the place. We had wanted to use the basement for storage, but when we learned that the renters upstairs had left a bunch of their stuff there, we decided not to make a huge deal out of it. In those few months since we opened, the upstairs tenants had changed numerous times. None of them ever came back for anything. Anyway, the caller then asked if we had any strange customers come into the shop since we reopened. I said no. That depends on what you mean by strange. He then said that the previous owners were into the occult and would sometimes invite other occult members over to the store after they closed, and that they would perform satanic acts and spells in the basement area. At that point, I just hung up the phone. I thought for sure the caller was just some lunatic trying to scare me. When we closed that night, I asked one of my friends to come into the basement with me. I told her that I wanted to check some things out down there and I just didn't want to go alone. She agreed and she went down with me. I don't know what I was expecting to see or what exactly I was looking for. In the yellow glow of the overhead lights, it just looked like a large and cluttered basement. I'd open door after door down there and just find more junk. Nothing weird and nothing unusual. When we headed into the laundry area, I noticed a door that was slightly ajar with some light coming out from behind it. Curious, I opened it and I found another set of stairs. These led to the upstairs apartments. I figured that the upstairs tenants might have been coming down here to do their laundry instead of going to the laundromat down the street. Again, this didn't seem that odd. When we walked back into the main area by the stairs that lead back up to the shop, I noticed something black and shiny on the floor. I thought it might have been tar or paint, so I knelt down and scraped at it with my fingernail. It was wax. Black wax. And there was a trail of black splatter marks leading over to a pile of junk just off to my right. I looked over at the pile of junk. It was covering up part of the floor. It seemed out of place. Everything else was in boxes and stacked up against the walls, but this stuff was just sort of laying near the center of the floor. I asked my friend to help me move the junk out of the way. We had just barely dragged the first pile out of the way when we saw a red triangle shape beneath it. It was spray paint, and I immediately recognized the symbol as one of the points of a pentagram. We moved the rest of the junk and uncovered the faded satanic symbol. There were pools of dried wax surrounding it and what appeared to be dried blood near the center. I frantically called my brother and asked him to run to the nearest store and get several locks. When he arrived, we locked the basement door that led up to the apartments. We also locked all the storage doors, and finally, we locked the door to the basement from our side. I knew now that I couldn't be too careful since the people in the upstairs apartments had previously been able to get into the basement. I thought that this would be sufficient to keep them out, and I had convinced myself that the caller from earlier that day might have been a former tenant. I really didn't know what to think at this point. The next morning I came in to open the shop. When I went inside, I saw literally hundreds of CDs and records tossed around the store. Also, the entire clothing rack of rock t-shirts and sweatshirts was completely empty, and all the clothing was tossed about the floor. I locked the door and I called the police. When they checked the store, they didn't find anyone. The locks in the basement were all still locked and intact. The security alarm hadn't tripped either, and when I had the alarm company test it, it was functioning normally. There also wasn't anything missing or any money stolen from the registers. The place was just a mess. It took the three of us about an hour to clean up everything, and we ended up opening the store late that day. I can't help but think that maybe the presence of the police outside the store before we opened may have scared away the customers. I don't think we made a sale that entire day. Later that night, when we were closing, my friend was cleaning the bathroom when I heard her screaming for me to come over. I ran over and asked what was wrong, thinking maybe she saw a rat or something. She pointed to the ceiling and asked, "What the heck is that?" I looked up and saw a blackish fluid slowly starting to leak from the wall. At first I thought maybe it could be a leaky pipe from upstairs, but the fluid didn't seem to be coming from any one particular spot. That's because as we stood there and observed the first drip slowly descending down the wall, we noticed another appearing in another spot. Then another. And another. I felt like we were in a horror movie. We both left the store immediately. In desperation, I contacted a local ghost hunting group and they agreed to investigate the store. My friend, my brother, and myself all stayed that night while the investigation was going on, and they even allowed us to participate with some of the audio recording. A few days after the investigation, the owner of the team met with us and played a short audio recording that they had captured that night. It's hard to describe what he was playing for us. It sounded like the team members talking, and then there was this raspy, unintelligible voice in the background that seemed to be responding to what they were saying. He then looked at my brother and asked, "Do you want to help your sister or not?" He said, "Yes, absolutely." It was then that he pulled a video camera from his bag and played a video clip. In it, I could see my brother sneaking over to one of their voice recorders and whispering into it. I was in shock. I punched my brother in the arm and screamed at him, "How could you do that? Why would you do that?" He said he was sorry and that he was just messing around. He swore up and down that it wasn't his voice on the recorder. I was furious with him. It was then that the investigator said, "He's right. That's not his voice in the recording. That's because this voice recorder was in the basement, not in the upstairs where your brother was filmed." He then looked at my brother again and asked, "Why would you do that? We've already proven that there is something happening here, and you want to waste my team's time by trying to sabotage the investigation?" My brother tried to apologize, but he was having none of it. He packed up his things and he left. I don't blame him. I guess news spread fast because no other ghost hunting team would ever return our phone calls. The phenomena kept continuing for a few more months, when I finally decided to close the store. I think the moral of this story is that if you suspect there is something paranormal happening, and a ghost hunting team tries to help you out, take them seriously, and don't try to play a joke on them. Something legitimately horrifying was happening in that store. Only now, I'll never know what it was.